sports, arts, music. Mike and Marty on the feed. Mike and Marty. Mike and Marty.
Good morning, community, and welcome to the feed. It's Wednesday, July 13th, and I'm solo today. Mike is on vacation. Our guest today is Isaac Evan Frantz, and he is running for the United States Senate. We'll talk to Isaac in a minute. I want to give you a couple of local events to check out. The Bells Falls Opera House this week is premiering Elvis. It's running July 15th through the 19th, and I've heard it's got pretty good reviews, so you might want to check it out. Classic movie this week, sponsored by Masuko and Stern, is Scarface. If you have a little friend, you might want to go and see Scarface at 7 p.m. tonight at the Opera House. We are reminding everyone that tonight is the book giveaway and ribbon cutting ceremony for the Bibliobike. If you remember, a few weeks ago, we had Sam Maskell here, and she was talking about the Bibliobike and being able to bring books to children that can't get to the library. The Bibliobike is going to be at the Central Elementary School this evening at 5 p.m. They'll be giving out books. Each child will get 2 free books to keep, and it starts at 5 p.m. And if it does rain, that will be inside the Central School. And final event is reminding everyone that this is the last weekend for Hamlet, happening out at Main Street Arts. On Friday night, it's happening at 7 p.m., and Saturday, it's happening at 2 p.m., so it's a matinee performance. Tickets are $25, and tickets are available at www.mainstreetarts.org. So welcome, Evan. Thank you so much for Zooming in with us today. Tell us a little bit about, well, actually, I'll back up a little bit. So I was doing a little research on your Facebook page and your website, and you had a lot of strong words on there. You had activist, fighter, community builder, and Vermonter. So tell us how you're a Vermonter.
Well, thanks for having me on, Marty, and it's great to be here. My name is Isaac Evans Frantz. I'm running for US Senate. I am from Brattleboro. That's where I grew up. I was born at Brattleboro Memorial Hospital. Grew up on Pepper Hill, West Brattleboro, surrounded by cows. That was my childhood. I attended public school through elementary, middle, and high school. When I was a high school student, I organized students around the state of Vermont to campaign for student seats on the Vermont State Board of Education, and Governor Howard Dean appointed me to the board as the first student with a vote on that board.
Nice.
And now, today, continue to be 2 student seats on the Vermont State Board of Education. So that's a little bit about I'm growing up in Brattleboro. That's where I currently live with my family. And I love the state. I love the beauty of the state. I love the sense of community in Vermont. This is a great place to live.
So when you were in the high school and you were on the State Board of Education, was that where you maybe got the bug for what you're doing now? Or where can you trace it back to your decision to get into politics? Where did that come from?
When I was in 2nd grade, I heard Bernie Sanders speak, talking about healthcare for everyone, education for everyone, making sure that people's needs were being met and that we took care of one another. And that inspired me to volunteer for his campaign. I showed up at his office as a 2nd grader, and they put me to work vacuuming the floor. That's how I started. And then after that, I continued to do some organizing. When I was in middle school, high school, I came out. I told my classmates that I was gay. And I saw the need for people to come together to make sure that people had the education and information that they needed so that we had fair policies. And I organized the state's first Gay Straight Alliance conference, where we brought young people together across the state. So it was a process, definitely came from a feeling of we have a responsibility to speak up and to connect with one another, and that we can change the way things are and we can make things better when we work together.
That's a great story. 2nd grade. That's amazing that you went in. So you talk about Bernie's, healthcare for all and education, and then you fast forward to where we are now. Do you think that very much progress has been made? And is that something that you're campaigning about, your platform is about?
Housing and healthcare for all is definitely part of my platform and something I'm campaigning for. There has been a rollback and a setback for us as a society in many ways. For instance, in the 1970s, we had less of a gap between the rich and the poor. That's grown since then, and that's a result of policies. It's the weakening of labor unions. That's intentional policy that started under President Reagan. So there's less economic equality now. But I would say that the work of leaders like Bernie has helped get healthcare for people. So community health centers. I worked for 8 or 9 years in community health centers, federally qualified health centers. And those health centers came about in part because of the work that people like Bernie did to secure that funding. He played an important role while holding out a vision for universal public health care, that we have guaranteed health care. He's worked on getting the funding for the community health centers in the meantime. And that's important that we have that. That's a real safety net for so many Americans.
What do you see as where we need to go with it? Like what would be your plan for how do we get to where we need to go with universal health care?
To start, we need to protect Medicare. We need to make sure that people continue to get the benefits so that we are protecting older adults in our society. I believe we should lower the age for Medicare so that more people can access these services. Ultimately, I'd like to see Medicare for all, system where everybody, no matter where you live, whether you have a job or not, no matter your age, you can see a medical provider, and that's not going to cost you. I grew up in a community where it was a rural area in West Brattleboro. We took care of one another. If my mom was making a cake and she didn't have enough sugar, well, I could just walk down to the neighbors, and if they weren't home, just walk in the door, grab a cup of sugar, write them a note, and we'd bring it back to them another day after we went to the grocery store. There was that kind of just showing up for each other, that trust. That's the sort of society that I'd like to live in, where we have that kind of camaraderie, that kind of support for one another. Healthcare is such a basic need. I don't believe that we should be leaving anyone out to suffer.
No, I agree with you. I think is another one of you mentioned another one of your strong running items is education. Let's talk a little bit about where you stand on that. And I just wanted to point out that you are the only candidate running that went through public school.
This is true. And I'm the only candidate in this race which is for Senator Patrick Leahy's seat, which he's retiring from after 48 years. I'm the only candidate in the Democratic primary, which I'm running in on August 9th, who grew up in Vermont. Education, as a high school student, I served on the Vermont State Board of Education. I worked as a teacher for years after that. I see this as critical for people to have the sort of opportunity, economic opportunity, and the sort of equality in our society that we need. We need education. We need to invest in young people. So that means childcare is free and high quality for all of our families. It means college tuition for public universities and colleges should be free. It means forgiving the student debt. When we invest in young people, we're investing in our society and we're making it better for all.
Yeah.
In Vermont, we have about 20,000 jobs that are empty. We need people to be able to fulfill those jobs. And one way that we can help retain our young people, bring young people to the state to do that work is by providing education and training and childcare for parents. That's one of the things that I've heard in biking across the state during this campaign, stopping in towns along the way. People have told me over and over again about the need for housing and the need for childcare. Some people during the pandemic were unable to continue working because they didn't have childcare. When we invest in childcare, when we pay childcare providers a living wage, when we say that this is a priority and that young people matter, we are giving people and families a really good start, giving young people a good start in their life, but also giving parents the opportunity to work outside the home and to help build our workforce.
Yeah, that sounds. So sounds like you're hoping that we can turn things around to be somewhat like they were when you grew up, and also when I grew up, when there was a stronger middle class. Would that be an accurate
Yes.
assessment? And through education and healthcare services availability, we can start to bring that.
Yes.
We can start to we've shrunken into the more of the haves and the have-nots, and not so much of the middle. We need to start supporting the middle again. Do you concur?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, in Vermont, there are middle class families that are paying a higher tax rate than billionaires in this country. That's not right.
No.
That doesn't make any sense. This is the richest country on the planet. We have the resources to take care of people of the state and of this country. There's no reason that people should be going hungry, people should be going without a home. In terms of housing, I will, as a US Senator, work with all of my might and get investments in housing, build more housing. To make sure that people can afford housing, we need to support this Section 8, the voucher program. And finally, we need supportive housing for the elderly, for people with disabilities, for people with mental health challenges. We need to make sure that there is housing for the people who are most vulnerable in our society, and that there's legal protections, that many tenants don't actually have access to legal representation. That's something that's important to make sure that people can stay in their housing once they get it.
So when you're saying you would work with all your might, I think that harkens back to our initial conversation where you state that you're a fighter and a community builder and an activist. Can you speak a little bit to each of those as well? Some of your past accomplishments to let the audience know.
Sure. I have helped build a national organization called Action Corps, which grew out of a humanitarian organization called Oxfam. And Action Corps' mission is to champion justice and solidarity with people most affected by climate disasters and violent conflict around the world. We have organized people around the country for policies like the Yemen War Powers Resolution to stop illegal US participation in the Saudi war in Yemen. Right now, President Biden is going to Saudi Arabia to meet with the dictator there, who is responsible for the assassination of a Washington Post journalist, who is responsible for one of the largest humanitarian crises on the planet in Yemen. And the United States has been complicit in that. So I organized people around the United States to go to the offices of their members of Congress and talk to those members of Congress. And when those members of Congress didn't open the door, then to rally in front of their offices for the constitutional right of Congress to decide on issues over war and peace. It's not the president, but president after president, whether they're Republican or Democrat, has just made unilateral decisions to go to bomb other countries, to provide military support for the invasion of other countries. And that's not right. So that's one thing that I have helped do. I played a pivotal role in the passage of the Yemen War Powers Resolution that was sent to President Trump's desk. We worked with Republicans, with Democrats across the country. And this photo is from the work that I did around getting the blockade of Yemen lifted, because that blockade was and is killing so many civilians, particularly children, by preventing desperately needed food and other resources from entering the country. I've found that when we come together, when we organize, when we build coalitions, bringing multiple organizations together, we can make the sort of changes that we so desperately need for the world. Another example of this was during the pandemic, because of my effectiveness with that campaign to stop US participation in the war in Yemen, which we're still working on, but we were able to get legislation passed. And because of my effectiveness with that, a group of economists asked me to build a national coalition for a global response to the pandemic. particularly an economic response, because so many people around the world were facing economic hardships, as we saw in the United States, but even worse in many of the lowest income countries. So I brought together the Presbyterian Church in the United States, Amnesty International, the AFL-CIO, and the Teamsters, major labor unions, the Iowa Farmers Union, groups like this. Over 100 organizations signed on to the letters that I circulated to Congress and to the Treasury of the United States, asking for their support for the release of international funds. It wouldn't cost the United States anything, but international funds that would be released to help countries in need. And as a result of our work, we got a bill passed through the United States House of Representatives, and ultimately the International Monetary Fund released $650 billion worth of emergency financial resources to 190 countries, which was about 3 times the largest amount that they had ever released in the past. This came as a result of Republicans and Democrats working together, farmers from North Dakota, from Iowa, nuns from Oklahoma, state Republican lawmakers from Oklahoma, Democrats from the Northeast. Building this national coalition, we were able to move policy at a very difficult time, just during the pandemic. So I've seen the power of people coming together, and that's the sort of energy, that's the sort of fight that I want to bring to the United States Senate.
That's great. Because it sounds like it's because I think that what people might question is that maybe you don't have a lot of background, right? On the surface, it might seem that way, but it seems like you have a very good handle on what you need to do to get things done in Washington.
We were able to move this legislation through and get policies changed, and billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars released to countries that were in need. It made a huge difference for so many countries that were getting further and further in debt during the pandemic. But this really helped keep them afloat. And it was a win-win solution because it didn't cost US taxpayers, because it was international funds being released. It also helped the United States by increasing export markets. When countries have enough money, then they're going to have an easier time purchasing US exports. It also is really helpful in countries being able to fund their budgets and keep people from starving. Now, we still have a lot of challenges. We need more of these resources to be released. And that's actually partly what inspired me to run for the United States Senate. When I saw that we needed more, that we needed to continue this work, but some of our allies in Washington sort of sitting back and just decided we'd done enough, and they didn't want to risk their political capital. They didn't want to risk being attacked for this advocacy. They were scared to do it. I thought, well, I'll do it. I will run, because that's something I would stand up for. I don't believe anybody should be starving to death. There's no need for that in today's world. So
that was your aha moment?
It was the key moment when I saw what we've been able to accomplish and how much more we could do if we had someone in the US Senate willing to stand their ground.
So when you decided to do this, like this is a curiosity question strictly, how do you then just say, I'm going to become a US Senator? What are the steps? And you're going up against sort of an incumbent? I mean, that's got to be a little daunting, because Peter Welch is going out of the House and now running for Senate. So how did what'd that look like?
We started by collecting signatures to get on the ballot. We held a kickoff rally in front of the Brattleboro Post Office on August 26th. We started collecting petition signatures. In Vermont, you need 500 people to get on the ballot. We got over 1,000 signatures. We traveled around the state, from Brattleboro to Burlington to Montpelier, Middlebury. We were all over the place, and people were readily signing these petitions, wanting to see another voice in the race, believing that in a democracy you need to have choices. That gives me courage, remembering that this campaign is giving Vermonters a choice. It's giving the choice between somebody who's really been part of the establishment, the status quo, or somebody who's bringing fresh energy, who's an activist, an organizer, who builds national coalitions, and will bring that spirit of change, of energy, of partnering with organizations around the country and particularly in Vermont to Washington. So I feel really good about this campaign. It's been great seeing how this message is resonating with Vermonters, this idea of bringing the voices of everyday people to Washington. Democracy is not a spectator sport. It's one where we need to participate in. I'm glad to see so many people are getting the ballots in the mail and are voting before August 9th, but people can also show up to the polls on Tuesday, August 9th and vote. I'm running in the Democratic primary. If elected, my job would be to serve all Vermonters. I'm running in the Democratic primary. I've been endorsed by the Vermont Progressive Party, and I hope that I'll earn the support of the people watching the show.
Great. What are your thoughts on, you mentioned the idea of like the long-term politicians and the status quo. What are your thoughts on like term limits and things like that?
I support term limits. It's important for us to have a chance for new energy. It's really hard for people to successfully win campaigns against incumbents. That helps the democracy when you have real options and you have level the playing field. I also believe in getting big money out of politics, and that's why, unlike my competitor, from the beginning, I am refusing corporate PAC money, because my job is to listen to Vermonters, not to the multinational corporations that want to fund campaigns. My job is to elevate the voices of regular people, everyday Americans, everyday Vermonters, and bring them to Washington.
Nice.
One of our biggest challenges I see in moving the sorts of policy changes that we need, whether it be around healthcare, reproductive rights, gun control, or the sort of socioeconomic justice that we need, where we have the wealthiest people paying their fair share. One of the problems with getting these changes is that people have given up on our political system, because they say that I've heard people say, you know, politicians, they're all the same anyway. They all take money from these big corporations. Part of my job is to restore confidence in voters, for voters to see, oh, there's somebody who is from a background that's maybe not so traditional, who has been an outsider from politics, but who's going to represent the interests of people who've been left behind, who's going to represent the interests of folks who've been on the outside. I grew up in a low-income family in Brattleboro. My family used the WIC program, which is federal food assistance, for a while when I was little. My mom worked in community daycares as a daycare provider. That's where I come from. And we need more people in government who come from backgrounds like mine, who are going to bring the voices of folks who know struggle, who know the importance of us standing for the people who are most vulnerable in our society.
We're down to, believe it or not, this conversation has gone very quickly. We're down to about 2 minutes, Isaac. So can you let people know how to best contact you if they want to support your campaign or just want to reach out? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, the best way is to visit my website, which is isaacforvermont.com. That's all spelled out, isaacforvermont.com. And you can also email my team at isaacforvermont.com. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Isaac for Vermont, or look at Isaac for VT. It's ISAACFORVT.
Awesome.
I look forward to hearing from your viewers and to earning your support in the August 9th Democratic primary.
What's the one thought that you want to leave our viewers with today?
Things can be really hard, especially during this pandemic. But remember that you have power beyond what you may realize. That when we come together, when we organize, when we support one another, when we lift up each other's voices, we can make the sort of changes that we need for our society to work for everyone. And we do that to start by voting. But even after the election, we do that by holding our elected officials accountable to making sure that they are representing us. Because remember that at the end of the day, the people that we elect to office work for us and not the other way around. So we as Vermonters are the bosses of our politicians. I thank you for your time. I thank you for supporting me and for joining this. If you believe in everyday Vermonters and that we should have a seat at the table, I hope you will join my campaign and support me in the August 9th race for US Senate.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Isaac. That's all the time we have today. Community, please get out and vote. This election is, like any election, is your chance to have your voice put forward. So vote on August 9th. Isaac, we thank you for joining us today and the best of luck in your election. And we will see you next week, community. Bye.
Local news, politics, business, sports, arts, music. Mike and Marty on the feed. Mike and Marty. Mike and Marty on the feed. Mike and Marty. Mike and Marty.
Oh, there we go. Now we're back.
Thanks, Marty.
Thank you so much. I hope I